"Could you use the back door this time, Ava? We have guests." That was my mother's greeting after 6 years. No hug, no eye contact. Just a polite request wrapped in shame. She didn't want the neighbours asking who I was. Not with the flags, not with the photos, not with me standing there like a ghost from the wrong war. I stepped aside, silent. I'd flown 12 hours to be here, in this same living room where my brother's law degree hung like an altar. Same white door, same china cabinet, but something was different. That's when I saw it. The flag, his flag. Folded, precise, crisp. The kind they hand to you when the man beside you doesn't come home. And it was shoved under the door like a doormat. My mother was using Caleb's funeral flag to keep the draft out. My knees didn't buckle. My voice didn't rise. But something inside me cracked, clean and deep. He died in my arms. And she was stepping over him. I wanted to scream, to lift that flag and throw it in her face. But instead I reached down, slowly, and took it. Folded it tighter, held it to my chest like a broken promise. That's when I knew I wasn't here for reconciliation, I was here for truth. The drive back to Maryland was a fog of muscle memory and emotional numbness. I hadn't seen the trees this green since I left Langley 3 years ago, yet somehow they felt more like camouflage than comfort. The thick oaks lining the road to my family's estate in Potomac stood like sentries, tall and silent, reminding me I didn't belong here anymore. My mother's voice from the phone call 2 nights ago echoed in my ears, laced with the usual grace and underlying disdain. "Lara's promotion is a big deal. Please dress appropriately and, if possible, avoid war stories." Then the final gut punch. "Oh, and Eva, use the side entrance. The main walkway will be for Lara's guests." That's how my return began, not with open arms or even a cold handshake, but a logistical note to minimise my impact. I parked near the catering van, behind 3 dumpsters brimming with floral wrapping and discarded charcuterie boards. As I stepped out, a gust of spring wind carried the scent of roses and rot. Fitting. The back door creaked as I pushed it open. No one turned to look. The kitchen was a whirlwind of white coats and clinking trays. To them, I was another vendor. Just as well. Then I saw her, Eleanor Bennett, my mother, standing in front of a marble island, adjusting the placement of caviar spoons like she was positioning missiles. Her eyes flicked up as I entered, scanned me like a scanner at an airport. No alarm, no emotion. "Good, you're here," she said, before turning back to the hors d'oeuvres. That was it. No hug. No mention of the 12-hour flight or the 5 years I spent recovering from injuries that never made the news. She didn't ask how I was. She never had. I placed the small box I had brought, my gift to Lara, on a table crowded with brand-name bags. Mine was wrapped in plain blue paper. A civilian in a sea of uniforms. I moved through the house like a foreign agent, one familiar with the territory but unwanted by the regime. In the grand hall, voices buzzed, congressmen, foundation donors, former ambassadors. My father laughed loudly from the front parlour. He hadn't seen me yet. Or maybe he had and chose not to. Then Lara appeared. My younger sister in a tailored cream suit, hair swept into a low bun that screamed future senator. She moved through the room like it owed her something. When her eyes caught mine, she smiled wide and shallow. "There she is," she exclaimed far too loudly. A few heads turned. She walked up, kissed the air beside my cheek, and locked an arm around my shoulders like she was posing for a magazine. "Everyone, this is my sister Eva. She works somewhere in DC, doing something classified." Light chuckles followed, and I felt them slice into me sharper than any blade I'd dodged overseas. I gave the polite nod, the one that says, "I'm used to this," because I was. Let me know if you'd like me to continue with part 1.2, where the first emotional dip begins, reaching the quiet rage of desecrated memory. I slipped away to the edge of the room, where a mahogany cabinet full of imported bourbon stood like an altar to the men in our family. There were no photos of me on the wall, just Lara's Harvard graduation, Dad shaking hands with senators, and one portrait of my mother at a Day-R fundraiser in pearls and self-satisfaction. I had once been part of this world, at least in name. Born a Bennett, raised to be polished and palatable, until I traded cotillions and summer internships for Kevlar vests and silent flights into unmarked airspace. And once I did, I was erased. I remember the first time it became official. I was 27, home from Kabul for 72 hours. I made it to my brother's engagement party, late, bruised, and exhausted. My mother pulled me aside, lips tight. "You don't have to come to these events anymore, Ava. People ask too many questions." I stopped asking why they were embarrassed of me long before that. It was simpler to assume they had crafted a version of our family that didn't have room for ghosts or government secrets. I was a shadow they couldn't manipulate, and that made me inconvenient. That night, after the toast for Lara's promotion to Deputy Advisor for Strategic Communications, a man from the DoD approached her and smiled with admiration. "You've got the Bennett brain and the charm, unlike some who vanish into the alphabet soup." He didn't look at me, but I knew the soup he meant: CIA, DCS, JSOC. I raised my glass, smiled like a good girl, and swallowed whatever I wanted to say. It wasn't until later, after most of the guests had left and the air reeked of white wine and false compliments, that I wandered into the sunroom to find a moment alone. That's when I found it again, the flag. Same one I'd noticed earlier shoved under the back door. Someone had tossed it in a basket beside unused linen napkins. The stars were still visible, still crisp, but the fabric was wrinkled, dulled. Caleb had died in Kandahar. I was there. I held pressure on his chest, screamed for the medevac, and whispered promises he never lived to see. That flag had been on his casket. I had carried it across 2 continents and handed it to his mother with trembling fingers. She cried, she hugged me, and now she had used it to stop a draft from ruining the catered air. That was when I stopped trying, stopped hoping they'd see me, stopped pretending I hadn't changed. I folded the flag again, tighter this time, crisper. Pressed the corners like I was wrapping a wound. Then I slid it into my satchel, zipped it shut, and stood up with a spine that no longer bent for ghosts. They wouldn't miss it. They wouldn't even know it was gone. But I would, and that would be enough, for now. You don't feel the moment you disappear. It's not one clean break, it's a series of small vanishings. A call you miss on purpose. A wedding invitation you never respond to. A voicemail you listen to but never return. At some point, people stop asking where you are. That was the beginning of my quiet war. In 2011, I went dark. They called it Operation Ganymede. Somewhere in a compound east of the Durand Line, a civilian contractor with a dual citizenship was funneling intel to rogue insurgents. And possibly something worse. Nuclear worse. I was deployed under NOS, non-official cover, with orders to intercept, identify, and disappear. I didn't sleep for 4 days. Cost was a heat box, the kind that makes your lungs stick together. I wore a red scarf and called myself Layla. I sold textiles. I drank bad tea. I listened. Every sound was suspicious. Every truck that backfired made my shoulder twitch. The paranoia wasn't a bug. It was the only thing keeping me alive. One night, my handler, callsign Nero, broke protocol and sent a burst. HVT moving, you're it. That was the moment I stopped being Eva Bennett, CIA liaison, and became a ghost. I tracked the target for 2 days without backup. On the 3rd night, I made the grab. It was supposed to be a clean exfil, 1 helo, 2 bodies, no noise. Instead, it turned into a bloodbath. The building we were in exploded on extraction. I remember flames and gravel embedding into my skin. I remember a scream that sounded like it came from someone else. I remember dragging a body out of the wreckage, her hands burned, face gone, eyes wide open. She wasn't the target. She was a hostage, a girl, American, 15 years old. I never knew her name until we landed at Bagram. That's when a man in a black suit pulled me aside and said, "You just saved the vice president's daughter." I blinked. I wasn't even looking for her. "No one was," he said, "except you. They offered to promote me, to bring me into the daylight. But there was one condition. I had to disappear entirely, not publicly, just bureaucratically. I had seen something I wasn't supposed to. The girl wasn't supposed to be there. Her presence was a classified mistake. And so to protect the optics, they buried her story and mine. They called it a classified rescue by joint forces. I called it erasure. That was the moment I truly vanished from every record, every commendation, every wall of names. No one in my family ever heard about it. They just assumed I was off wasting my life in the desert, chasing shadows, and honestly, that's not far from the truth. After Ganymede, they gave me a medal I couldn't display and a pension I couldn't explain. My name never appeared on the mission briefings or the congressional report. I was a ghost, even to the people who signed my paycheck. I spent the next year moving from one rented apartment to another, cheap places with thin walls and dusty floors that smelled like someone else's regret. I ate soup out of cans, slept in hoodies, and taped blackout curtains to every window. The bureau offered me desk work, analysis, consulting. They said it was a chance to recover. But I wasn't injured, not physically anyway. I'd been burned in a different way, not by the explosion, but by what followed: silence. No one asked how I'd pulled the girl from the wreck. No one cared how I got out alive with 3 cracked ribs and part of someone else's blood soaked into my boots. No one came looking when I didn't show up at the DC office again. So I did what ghosts do. I drifted. I spent long nights fixing a watch that wouldn't tick just to feel like I could repair something. I went for runs at 3 a.m. when the streets were dead and no one could look me in the eye. I told myself I was training, but for what, I didn't know. Eventually, I stopped trying to feel better. I just tried to feel less. That's when the dreams started. They weren't nightmares, not in the screaming sense, but they gnawed at me. Caleb's face blurred with the girls, her burned hands reaching for me. My mother shaking her head at a memorial service that never happened. Once I dreamed I was buried under glass, everyone above me looking down, shaking their heads. Why didn't she try harder? Why didn't she come home? I woke up gasping, soaked in sweat, my knuckles bloody from punching the floor in my sleep. I thought about calling someone. Marcus, maybe. Or Lara, even though she'd made it clear I embarrassed her every time I showed up in public with boots instead of heels. But I didn't, because ghosts don't call. We haunt. The only thing that anchored me was an old compass Caleb gave me the night before his last deployment. A military-issue relic with a cracked face and initials carved into the back. I'd kept it in my locker for years, untouched. After everything, it still pointed north. I didn't believe in signs, but I started wearing it around my neck again anyway, because some part of me, some tiny broken piece, still wanted to find my way back. Not home, not to them, but to myself. I hadn't spoken to Marcus Vance in almost 5 years. Last I saw him, we were both covered in dust, crouched behind a burned-out vehicle in Aleppo, exchanging coordinates with trembling fingers and silent nods. He was calm even when bleeding, even when chaos swallowed the sky. If anyone understood what it meant to vanish, it was him. He sent me a postcard. That's how it started. No return address, just a square photo of a lighthouse in Maine and 6 words in his blocky handwriting, time to come up for air. No name, no signature, but I knew it was him. 3 days later, I boarded a train heading north with a bag of clean clothes, 2 fake passports, and the compass around my neck. The house was on the edge of nowhere, waves breaking against jagged stone, air thick with salt, and silence. When I arrived, the door was unlocked. Marcus was waiting in the kitchen, brewing tea like we were about to discuss baseball and not the bones in my closet. He looked older, heavier around the eyes, but the voice was the same, low, deliberate, like every syllable mattered. "Still drink chamomile?" he asked. I drink whatever doesn't taste like war, I said. He poured without smiling. We sat for a while in quiet. No small talk, just the sound of wind and an old wall clock ticking in the background. I stared at the bookshelf behind him, full of history and fiction and government lies dressed as memoirs. Finally he spoke. You disappeared too well, Ava. I learned from the best, I said. He winced, not visibly, but enough for me to catch it. And that's when I knew something was coming, something heavy. I need to tell you something, he said, setting down his cup.
And I need you to not speak until I finish. That's when my stomach tightened. I'd faced guns, bombs, interrogation, but this was different. This was personal. Marcus folded his hands, looked me straight in the eye. After Ganymede, the agency asked me to scrub the record. You were too high profile. The rescue was too messy. If the vice president's daughter being there had leaked, it would have collapsed half the cabinet. I know, I said softly. No, he shook his head. You don't. I didn't just erase you from the op. I removed you from the honours list, the Valor Cross. You were nominated. You would have been the youngest in history to receive it. My breath stopped. He kept going. I authorised the redaction. I signed the papers. I buried your name. The room shrank around me. The tea in my hands trembled. I thought of all the nights I blamed politics, bureaucracy, fate. But it wasn't a faceless machine. It was Marcus. It was the man who trained me. The man I trusted. And he had done it with the same calm precision he once used to teach me how to assemble a field rifle in 20 seconds flat. I stood up. My chair scraped the floor loud enough to make him flinch. I didn't speak. Not yet. I couldn't. My pulse thundered in my ears, my vision tunneled. He'd killed my name, my legacy, and suddenly I wasn't sure if I had it in me to forgive him. Shall I continue with part 3.2, where Eva responds, and Marcus reveals one final twist? He had a reason that went deeper than betrayal. I stepped out onto the porch, the salt air cutting into my lungs like glass. My hands clenched the wooden railing until my knuckles went white. The ocean below roared like it was mourning something too old to name. He buried me. The one person I thought would have fought for me had been the one to press the shovel down harder. I didn't hear Marcus walk up behind me, but I felt it, the shift in pressure, the pause in the wind. I didn't do it to hurt you, he said softly. I didn't answer, not yet. Let the silence work on him for once. I did it, he continued, because someone had to make you untouchable. I turned my head, barely. What the hell does that mean? He leaned against the railing beside me, eyes focused on the horizon. The vice president's daughter wasn't just collateral. Her father wasn't just trying to cover it up. There was a faction inside, the directorate, that wanted her death to be useful. They saw it as a tool, a reason to justify a retaliatory operation that would have killed thousands. You saving her, that ruined their plan. I blinked. I thought that was a good thing. Marcus gave a sad smile. It was, but it made you a problem. He reached into his coat and pulled out a flash drive, laid it on the rail between us like an offering. Everything's on here, emails, orders, Operation Paper Veil. You were flagged. They wanted you silenced, professionally or otherwise. My stomach dropped. He looked at me then, and this time the calm in his eyes wasn't composure, it was pain. They gave me a choice, Eva. Let them discredit you or make you vanish in a way that kept you alive. So I buried your name, I killed your medal, but I kept you breathing. I wanted to scream at him, to tell him that he still took something from me that I could never get back, my place, my recognition, my dignity. But another part of me, the soldier part, understood exactly what he meant, because I'd made decisions like that too. Terrible, merciless ones that no one else would ever thank me for. You should have told me, I whispered. I couldn't, he said, until now. And why now? I asked. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he picked up the compass hanging from my neck and turned it gently in his fingers. Because someone's poking around your past, not the agency, not even Langley, something else, quiet, private. And if they find out you're alive before you're ready... His words trailed off, but the message landed. They'll finish what others started. We stood there a while longer, the silence between us thicker than the fog. Finally, I reached for the flash drive and slid it into my coat pocket. I don't forgive you, I said. I know. But I'll use what you gave me. He nodded. I stepped down the porch stairs, my boots crunching on gravel, the wind whipping harder now. I didn't know what I was walking toward, only that it wasn't safety, and it sure as hell wasn't peace. But it was something, and that was more than I'd had in years. I hadn't worn a suit in years, not since I left the agency and traded blazers for flannel shirts and anonymity. But today, I needed the armour. Not for bullets, this wasn't that kind of mission, but for cameras, microphones, and the 1,000 cutting glances of people who thought they knew everything. The Global Strategic Security Summit was being held at the Hay Adams Hotel in DC, just 4 blocks from the White House. The room was high-ceilinged, soaked in light and politics. Flags lined the stage like obedient soldiers. The guest list was stacked. Cabinet members, foreign ministers, think tank elites, and Lara. She stood at the podium with that polished, media-friendly grin, introducing the panel discussion on transparency in global defense operations. The irony could have cracked concrete. I watched her from the wings, arms folded, heart steady. Marcus's flash drive was in my inner coat pocket. The plan was simple. I would wait until the Q&A session. When Lara opened the floor to questions, I'd ask one she wasn't prepared for. Then I'd reveal everything. My erasure. The cover-up, her involvement. Because it wasn't just the agency that buried me, it was her. Lara knew about the redaction. She signed off on it back when she was a junior liaison to the Senate Intelligence Committee. She wasn't coerced. She wasn't forced. She saw my disappearance as convenient. Cleaner for her future. A ghost in the attic made her resume shine brighter. And now she was standing in front of the world, calling for accountability. I nearly laughed. When the moderator finally opened the floor, I stepped up to the mic. Several heads turned. Lara spotted me, and her smile twitched. Name and affiliation? The moderator asked. Eva Bennett, I said clearly. No current affiliation, former field operative, CIA, Division 9, Special Activities Center. The room fell quiet. Lara froze. You could almost hear the static in the air. My voice didn't waver. My question is for Deputy Advisor Bennett. What's your position on redacting valor citations for agents involved in high-risk civilian rescues, particularly those suppressed due to political embarrassment? A beat passed, then 2. Someone coughed in the back. Lara's eyes narrowed. I'm not aware of the specific case you're referring to, she said smoothly, but I can assure you all recommendations for redaction go through legal and ethical review. I cut her off. You signed mine. Gasps. Actual gasps. Chairs creaked, phones were raised, recording. I stepped forward. Operation Ganymede. Eastern Afghanistan, 2011. A 15-year-old hostage. The Vice President's daughter. You redacted my commendation so her rescue could be erased from history and I could be buried with it. Her mouth opened, closed. No comment, she said finally. Wrong answer. I reached into my pocket and held up the drive. This contains everything. Memos, approvals, the chain of suppression. Including your signature, Lara. Now the cameras clicked in rapid fire. Reporters stood. The moderator raised both hands, trying to regain order, but it was too late. The silence had already shattered. The moment I stepped away from the mic, the room cracked wide open. Journalists surged forward like bloodhounds, cameras flashing like muzzle fire. Panelists whispered to aides. A senator spilled his drink. Lara stood frozen at the podium, a marionette without a script. her hands still gripping the edges like they could hold the ground in place. I didn't wait to see the fallout. I moved fast, exiting stage left through a service hallway that smelled like old coffee and nerves. My boots echoed down the marble corridor as I pushed open the side door out into the blinding sun of a DC afternoon. Marcus was waiting in a black sedan at the curb. He didn't speak as I slid into the passenger seat. He just drove, cutting through traffic with the quiet focus of a man who had practiced every escape route in the city. Only when we hit the highway did he finally say, "It's done." I stared out the window. "No, that was just the prelude," he nodded. "The agency's already scrambling. They'll leak something to discredit you, call you unstable, insubordinate, burned out. Classic playbook." "I'm counting on it," I said. He glanced at me. "You want them to come for you?" "No," I said. "I want them to come at me, out in the open, so I can drag them into the light with me." Silence. Then Marcus reached into the glove compartment and handed me a manila envelope. "They'll come hard. You need to see this before they do." Inside were documents I hadn't seen before, transcripts, emails, briefings, and at the centre of them, Lara's name again. But she hadn't acted alone. Her clearance had been used in tandem with another signature, another authorising hand, my father, Richard Bennett, former Undersecretary of Defence, retired, wealthy, venerated. He had approved the operation to discredit me, and Lara had just been the courier. I felt my throat tighten. "This wasn't about optics," Marcus said. "It was about keeping control. You were a variable they couldn't manage." "They didn't just erase me," I whispered. "They used me." "And then discarded you," he said. I sat back, letting the truth soak into my bones. For years I thought I was invisible because I didn't matter, but now I knew I'd been buried because I mattered too much. They were afraid of me, of what I'd done, of what I might say. And maybe, for the first time, they had a right to be. I looked at Marcus. "You still got that contact at Channel 7? He nodded once. "She owes me." "Good," I said, "because I'm done being quiet." The studio lights were hotter than I remembered. Or maybe it was just the nerves humming under my skin like a tripwire ready to snap. I sat across from Mara Singh, lead anchor of Channel 7's primetime current affairs broadcast. She was razor-sharp, famous for slicing politicians apart without ever raising her voice. But tonight, her tone was almost reverent. We're joined tonight by Eva Bennett, former CIA operative, whose story has shaken both the intelligence community and Capitol Hill in just 48 hours. I gave a faint smile. Nothing performative, just calm. "Thank you for having me." The segment rolled fast. Background footage, newsreels, headlines shouting Bennett whistleblower, family ties to military cover-up, truth buried in Kabul. I told my story. Not all of it, just enough. The operation, the redaction, the silence that followed, Lara, my father. I didn't ask for sympathy. I didn't accuse with fury. I laid out facts, cold, deliberate, undeniable. The kind of truth that doesn't need drama to wound. By the time we went to commercial, Mara's hands were trembling just slightly as she handed me a bottle of water. "They're going to come after you," she said quietly. "They already have," I replied. "Now I'm just finally looking back." As I stepped off the set, my phone buzzed. A message, unknown number. "You really thought it was just Lara?" I froze. 3 dots. "Tell Marcus I said hello." My blood turned to ice. I recognized the pattern, the language, the cadence. Nero, my old handler, the one who sent me into Operation Ganymede, the one who disappeared right after, the one Marcus swore was dead. I showed Marcus the message on the drive back. His jaw clenched. "That's not possible," he said. "We buried him." "Well," I said, "apparently you missed." He pulled over in a dark alleyway, killed the engine, and stared at the dashboard like it could give him answers. "Why now?" I asked. "Why resurface?" Marcus rubbed his temple. "Because we kicked the hornet's nest." Or, I said, because he's been waiting for the right moment to take me off the board permanently. Marcus turned to me, eyes sharp again. Not the mentor now, the soldier. He's not just a threat, Ava. He's an architect. If he's behind this, the redaction was just one play in a much bigger game. I exhaled, the weight of everything pressing down like concrete on my chest. I'd spent years trying to find peace. Now I was at the centre of a war I didn't even know I'd started. Then we find him, I said. Marcus nodded. And we finish it. The Bennett estate hadn't changed. The iron gate still moaned like it was dying every time it opened. The same manicured hedges, the same stone fountain that never quite worked, and inside, the same silence, cold and curated, like a museum no one actually enjoyed. Lara was waiting in the solarium. Her cream suit was gone, replaced by a navy sweater and bare feet. She looked younger like this, or maybe just more exposed. "I figured you'd come," she said, not looking up from her glass of wine. "Though I thought you'd bring cameras this time." "Not everything's for the public," I said. "Some things are personal." She finally looked at me, and for the first time I saw it. Regret. Not the polished kind you show donors or journalists. The kind that creeps into your face at 2 a.m. when no one else is watching. "You embarrassed me," she said, voice barely above a whisper, "but I deserved it." "I'm not here for an apology," I said. "I'm here for answers." She blinked. "More?" I nodded. "Nero's alive." The wine glass slipped from her hand and cracked against the tile. She didn't move. "I got a message," I continued. "He knows I went public. He knows Marcus is involved. And he said something strange. He said to tell Marcus hello. Like he's watching us." Her face turned pale, but her eyes were suddenly sharp again. "Eva," she said slowly, "you don't know what you're walking into. Then tell me." She stood and walked to the fireplace, reached behind a decorative panel and pulled out a small metal box. Inside was a file marked Echo Family, classified, Level 6 access. "I wasn't the one who first signed your name away," she said, voice trembling. "I was a pawn, Eva. The order came from higher. From someone you know." I flipped open the file and felt the floor tilt. Inside were surveillance transcripts, emails, signed directives, one name repeated over and over, Richard Bennett, my father. And next to it, Nero, primary sponsor. I stared at it. "Dad and Nero?" Lara nodded. "He wasn't just a contact. He was a partner. Our family wasn't just respected. We were embedded." "What are you talking about?" "Dad funded off-book operations for years. Nero ran them. That's how we had the estate, the connections. You weren't erased for what you did. You were erased because what you knew could unravel all of it." My hands shook. It wasn't just betrayal. It was blood deep. "I didn't know until after Ganymede," Lara whispered. "But by then, I was already complicit and scared." I turned away, breath shallow. My reflection in the glass looked like someone I didn't recognize. Not a ghost, not a soldier, a legacy. Twisted, corrupted, and carefully constructed. Lara stepped closer. "I didn't want this life. I tried to leave. That's when they came for my son." I turned sharply. "What?" "Ethan. They threatened him. That's why I signed the redaction. That's why I stayed quiet. That's why I let them bury you." The silence wrapped around us like a noose. Then she whispered, "But I'm done protecting monsters." Lara opened a hidden compartment beneath the bookshelf, one I didn't know existed, despite growing up in this house. Inside was a black hard case, secured with a biometric lock. She pressed her thumb against it, and after a faint hiss, it popped open. Inside was a sleek, matte black drive with a gold etching on the side. Violet 7. "This is everything," she said, sliding the drive into my hand. "Financial records, shell corporations, dark contracts, Nero's entire network.
all backed up to offshore redundancy servers. If you go public with it, you won't just bring down Nero. You'll implode half the post-9/11 intelligence structure. I stared at the small object, heavier than it looked. This is the kind of thing that gets people disappeared, I said. Lara gave a bitter smile. We were never people to them, Eva, just leverage. She sat down, suddenly looking 10 years older. I've been waiting for someone to take this. I couldn't. Not without them using Ethan against me. And now? I asked. Her voice cracked. Now they already know where I stand. There's no walking this back. She reached into her sweater and pulled out a burner phone. I'll disappear. With Ethan. New identities, new passports. I've had it ready for years. I nodded. Marcus can help. Lara hesitated, then looked up. I know I don't deserve it, but can I ask one thing? I didn't answer, just waited. Don't tell him who I was. Let my son think his mother was just boring, safe, unimportant. That hit harder than I expected. I nodded once. She stood, wiped her eyes, and looked at me like it might be the last time. Go. Before they realise, I opened the box. I left the estate through the servants' hallway, the same one our mother used to make me take during parties. But this time, I wasn't sneaking away. I was walking out armed. Outside, the air felt heavier, charged. The kind of quiet before a storm detonates. Marcus was waiting a few blocks away, parked in a nondescript hatchback that looked like it belonged to someone's uncle. When I climbed in, I handed him the drive. He turned it over slowly, eyes narrowing. Violet 7, he muttered. I thought this was a myth. It's real, I said. And it's ours. He looked at me, something between awe and dread in his expression. This will burn everything down. I'm counting on it. He didn't start the car. Eva, he said slowly, there's no coming back from this. Once it's out, they'll go scorched earth. On you, on me, on anyone who ever touched this. I met his gaze without flinching. They already buried me once, Marcus. Let's make sure this time they choke on the dirt. He smiled, not the calm mentor smile, the wolfish grin of a man who'd been waiting a long time to finish what others were too afraid to start. Then let's end it. We didn't dump the Violet 7 files all at once. That would have been reckless, easy for Nero to spin as cyber-terrorism or foreign disinfo. Instead, we used a slow burn strategy. Controlled leaks, targeted exposure. A senator here, a black site budget there. Contracts that didn't exist suddenly showing up in Freedom of Information Act appeals. Marcus called it surgical chaos. I called it justice with a scalpel instead of a bomb. The first file went to an independent journalist who still lived in her van and backed up her sources in triplicate. The second went to a UN investigator who owed Marcus a favour from Berlin. The third? We sent that one directly to the desk of a Department of Justice prosecutor who'd once told me I was too valuable to waste on courtroom politics. 3 days in, Violet 7 was already working. By day 5, congressional staffers were resigning. Media outlets were chasing ghosts. Whispers started swirling about an intelligence structure too big to fail and too rotten to keep. And then the emails started. Anonymous threats, spoofed addresses, VPN-wrapped warnings. You've made your point. Back off. You'll undo everything you swore to protect. Last chance. We didn't stop. On day 6, we hit the first personal nerve. A dummy corporation traced back to a sitting defence contractor CEO, who also happened to be Nero's former business partner. That's when the fire started burning toward us. Marcus noticed it first. Our drop server's been pinged, he said, staring at a monitor. They're tracing the route backward. I stood behind him, watching the IP triangulate. How fast? He didn't answer. Instead, he yanked a flash drive out of the terminal and crushed it under his heel. Pack your bag, he said. We were out the door in minutes, moving low, moving quiet. I ditched my phone. Marcus torched the laptop. In less than an hour, we were in a new car, headed for the Appalachians. And still, It wasn't fast enough, because Nero was already ahead. When we stopped at a rural gas station off Route 11, a kid behind the counter handed me a small cardboard box. "This came for you," he said, shrugging. "Guy dropped it off 10 minutes before you showed." I froze. Marcus stiffened. Inside was a burner phone, already powered on, already ringing. I looked at Marcus. He gave a tight nod. I answered. "Hello, Eva." Nero's voice came through, calm and clear, like we were old friends catching up over coffee. "You're doing beautifully," he said. "Impressive work, controlled, elegant. I always appreciated that about you." I didn't say a word. He continued, "But here's the problem. You're burning my house down while standing inside it." I clenched the phone tighter. "If you think this ends with files and headlines," he said, "then you've forgotten what we were trained for." A pause, then, "Say hello to your mother for me." The line went dead. I felt my stomach twist. Marcus was already dialing a satellite line, patching through layers of secure relay. "Eva," he said, voice grave, "he's not bluffing." I already knew. I was running toward the car before he finished the sentence, because Nero had just reminded me he didn't fight in the light. He hunted in the dark, and now he was inside my house. We reached the Bennett estate just after midnight. No sirens, no security detail, just 2 headlights cutting through the fog and my pulse hammering loud enough to drown out the engine. The front gate was open. That never happened. Marcus pulled the car up onto the grass. I was out before he stopped, sprinting toward the house, gravel cutting into the soles of my boots. The door was ajar. Inside, the lights were on. But too quiet. No movement. No footsteps. Just the soft hum of a classical piano track playing from the old sound system. Lara always liked to leave it on. Chopin. It felt like a lullaby played at the wrong speed. I turned the corner into the living room and stopped cold. My mother sat upright in her favourite chair, not tied, not bruised, just still. Her eyes were open, staring past me. A single bullet wound sat like a red dot just above her left brow. Clean, cold, surgical. I dropped to my knees before I even realised I was moving, my fingers on her neck. No pulse, skin already cooling. Marcus entered behind me, saw the body, and didn't speak. He knew this wasn't a moment for orders. I reached into her lap and found it, a folded sheet of paper tucked neatly beneath her hands. "The sins of the father are paid in full. Caddunt done." N. There was no chaos, no broken glass, no signs of struggle, just an execution dressed up like closure. Marcus knelt beside me, voice low. She was a message. "I know," I said. "Do you think she knew about Nero, about your father?" I nodded once. She always knew. She just chose the lie. I stood, legs shaking but steady. My mother hadn't been a soldier. But in her own way, she'd waged war. On truth, on discomfort, on anything that cracked the image of a perfect family. And now, the lie had devoured her. I turned to Marcus. "Where's Lara?" His jaw tightened. "Safe house, North Carolina, one of mine." "You trust it?" "I built it myself." I grabbed my bag. "Then we go now." Because he's not done. We drove through the night, clouds rolling overhead like a storm waiting for permission. Neither of us spoke much. We didn't need to. The drive itself felt like a countdown, not just to another confrontation, but to the end of something deeper. By the time we reached the cabin, the sun was bleeding over the hills. We approached quietly, weapons drawn, not out of fear, but out of muscle memory. Marcus tapped the knock code. Lara opened the door, eyes wide, clutching Ethan in one arm and a Glock in the other. She scanned our faces, and her own twisted. "Mom?" I nodded. Her knees buckled, but she didn't cry. Not yet. She just pulled Ethan tighter and whispered,
Then he's coming for us all. I stepped forward, placed my hand on her shoulder. No, I said, he's coming for me. The cabin was built for containment. One way in, one way out, reinforced walls, a secondary escape hatch under the floorboards. Marcus had designed it as a safe house for deep cover assets who had nowhere else to run. Now it was my battlefield. The plan was simple: draw Nero out, trap him inside his own mythology. He didn't chase blindly, he orchestrated. He calculated risk like a surgeon with a scalpel. So I had to give him exactly what he craved: control. We baited the hook by leaking a false drop, a final Violet 7 key left unsecured on a known proxy server. Then we rerouted all server activity back to this location. It wouldn't take long. If he was watching, and we knew he was, he'd come for it himself, because that's what predators do when they think their prey is cornered. They expose themselves. The sun was low, shadows stretching long across the pine floorboards. Lara sat by the kitchen table, Ethan asleep in her lap. She hadn't spoken much since the call about our mother's body was confirmed. I didn't press her. Some grief doesn't need an audience. Marcus checked the last perimeter tripwire and came to stand beside me near the window. He held out an earpiece. "You still sure about this?" I slid it in. "It's the only way. You know he won't negotiate. I'm not here to bargain." I pulled the compass from around my neck. The face was cracked, same as it had been since Kabul. But the needle still pointed true. Still reminded me that no matter how far I'd wandered, I was never lost, just waiting for the right place to stop. This was that place. A faint crackle in the earpiece. A ping on the monitor. Marcus straightened. Movement. South trail. No vehicle detected. Approach is slow. On foot. I nodded. Of course. Nero wouldn't risk being tracked. He'd come like a whisper, like a ghost sliding between trees. I stepped to the white front door. My hand hovered over the knob. Last time I'd stood in front of a white door like this, I was 20 years old, just back from my first op. My mother had met me in the same way she always did, with politeness and distance. But now, this door wasn't a symbol of exclusion. It was a threshold. And this time, I wasn't the one being kept out. A flash in the trees. I raised my sidearm. Footsteps. Marcus behind me, calm, ready. Then a voice. Smooth, familiar, too close. "You always did like dramatic settings." Nero. He stepped into view like he belonged there. Black jacket, no weapon in sight. But I knew better. He never needed one to kill. I opened the door slowly, gun steady. He smiled like an old friend. "I thought I trained you better than to paint yourself into a corner." I didn't smile back. "You didn't train me, Nero. You built me, broke me, then buried me." He shrugged. "And yet, here you are." A pause. Then, "Are you going to shoot me, Eva?" I didn't answer. Because I wasn't ready for the shot yet. I wanted him inside. He crossed the threshold like it belonged to him. Nero always had that gift, making every space feel like it was his to command. He didn't blink at the reinforced walls or the heavy silence inside. His eyes skimmed the room like a scanner. Marcus by the hallway, Lara just visible in the kitchen doorway, Ethan tucked behind her, asleep. Then he looked at me, and for the first time, I saw it. Not confidence, curiosity. "Eva," he said softly, "I never wanted it to be this way." "Then you shouldn't have pointed the gun first." He laughed, the sound low and oddly genuine. "I never pointed the gun, I just left it where others would pick it up." My stomach turned. "How many?" I asked. He tilted his head. "How many lives did you ruin just to protect a lie?" Nero sighed, then took a step closer. "You were never supposed to find out about Violet 7. It wasn't about you. It was about preserving the architecture. You think we built this country on laws and morals? No. We built it on secrets, the ones we kept and the ones we created." Another step. Marcus tensed.
I raised my hand. Don't. I gave you everything, Nero said. Purpose, power. I made you something the world couldn't touch, and you hated me for it. I didn't hate you, I said. I raised my weapon slowly, level with his chest. I hated that you made me believe I was nothing without you. His face flickered, just for a second. That was enough. I nodded once. Marcus hit the switch. Metal shutters slammed over the windows. The magnetic door lock engaged behind Nero with a hard click. He turned calmly. A trap, he said, more impressed than angry. Well done. You taught me well, I replied. He stepped forward again, but I didn't back down. You think you can end this? He said. This isn't a manhunt. This is a machine. Kill me and the gears keep turning. No, I said, but without you, it chokes, it stutters, and that's enough to start breaking things. His smile returned, crooked this time, older. I always knew you'd be the one to pull the trigger. I tightened my grip, and then he did something I didn't expect. He closed his eyes. No final threat, no lunge, just silence, like a man ready to meet the God he never believed in. But I didn't shoot, not yet. Instead, I lowered my weapon and whispered, You don't get to choose how this ends. Marcus stepped forward with the cuffs. Nero didn't resist. We're not going to kill you, I said. We're going to expose you. His eyes opened. That, finally, made him flinch. Everyone you ever manipulated, every deal you buried, every family you broke, they're going to know your name. Outside, sirens began to rise in the distance. Marcus's final play, timed perfectly. Federal agents would be here in minutes. The files were already live. Nero had always believed death was the only real silence. He never prepared for shame. As the agents stormed in, I stood by the white door, watching it swing open to the rising sun. For years, it had been a barrier. Now, it was just a door. And I was finally walking through it on my own terms.